They called her the Old Lady as she knelt alone by her vintage Harley, meticulously polishing chrome while the real bikers laughed. When she reached under the handlebar, her sleeve slipped up, revealing a faded tattoo on her forearm. The death head insignia of the Hells Angels stared back at them, authentic and unmistakable. The mocking biker froze mid-sentence, his smile vanishing instantly. Whispers spread through the rally as everyone's attitude transformed from ridicule to fear. Nobody wears that mark without earning it, and nobody earns it without a story written in blood. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If stories of quiet strength and unexpected respect move you, please consider subscribing to help us share more powerful moments that often go untold. The morning sun beat down on Thunder Valley, transforming the annual motorcycle rally into a shimmering sea of chrome and leather. What had begun decades ago as a gathering of authentic outlaw riders had evolved into something more commercial, vendors hawking genuine biker gear to tourists, social media influencers posing on bikes they would never ride, and weekend warriors whose leathers had never seen rain. Away from this carnival atmosphere, Carmen Reyes knelt beside her 1977 Harley Shovelhead, methodically cleaning each piece of chrome with slow, deliberate movements. Her bike lacked the flashy customization that dominated the rally, but to knowledgeable eyes, it told a different story. Thousands of miles of authentic riding, mechanical modifications for endurance rather than show, and the kind of meticulous maintenance that only comes from intimate knowledge of machinery. Carmen herself was similarly unadorned. No patches, no club insignia, just faded riding leathers that had clearly protected her through years on the road. Her face, weathered, lined, but striking, revealed nothing as she worked. She had positioned herself deliberately away from the crowds, in a spot with clear sight lines to all approaches. A habit so ingrained, she likely no longer recognized it as strategic. From 20 yards away, Ren Holloway adjusted her camera lens, capturing Carmen's isolated figure against the backdrop of the gaudy rally. Unlike others filming for social media, Ren's equipment was professional grade, her movements those of an experienced documentarian. At 32, she had already spent years embedded in difficult environments, and something about Carmen's deliberate isolation had caught her trained eye. Ren noticed what others missed, the way Carmen cataloged everyone who passed, the perfect sight lines of her chosen spot, the surgical precision of her maintenance routine. When Carmen briefly looked up, their eyes met across the distance, a moment of unspoken recognition between two outsiders. Carmen returned to her work without acknowledgement, but Ren felt the connection and continued filming. The moment broke when a group of younger riders approached Carmen's space, led by a man in his early 30s with the kind of excessive leather gear that suggested more money than miles. Paxton Thorne sported patches and pins that any authentic rider would know he hadn't earned, his new boots unmarked by shifters or road debris. "Check it out," Paxton announced loudly to his friends, nodding toward Carmen. Weekend warrior grandma polishing her antique. His crew laughed on cue, several pulling out phones to capture what they anticipated would be an amusing confrontation. Carmen continued her methodical cleaning, giving no indication she had heard them. Emboldened by her silence, Paxton stepped closer. "Hey there, sweetheart. Want me to take your picture with a real bike? Something made this century?" When Carmen remained silent, Paxton's expression hardened slightly. He wasn't accustomed to being ignored. "Asked you a question, ma'am," he said, the respectful term delivered with mocking emphasis. Carmen's hands never faltered in their rhythm as she moved from the engine to the handlebars, the only acknowledgement of his presence a slight adjustment of her position to maintain awareness of where he stood. Frustrated by her continued silence, Paxton looked back at his friends with an exaggerated shrug, then began mimicking Carmen's cleaning motions in an exaggerated pantomime, drawing laughs from his crew. "This is how they did it in the old days, guys," he narrated in a falsetto voice. "Gotta get every speck before the retirement home curfew." Through this performance, Carmen remained focused on her task, though Ren, still filming from a distance, noticed the almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw. As Carmen reached under the handlebar to polish a difficult spot, her sleeve rode up several inches. Revealed on her inner forearm, a faded but unmistakable Hells Angels death head tattoo. This wasn't a modern reproduction or a similar-looking design that the uninitiated might confuse with the real thing. This was the authentic mark with specific details that only legitimate members would have worn, a mark that even the most dedicated posers would never dare fake. Paxton noticed it first, his mockery freezing mid-sentence. His expression transformed from derision to shock to unmistakable fear in the span of seconds. When Carmen realized what he had seen, she didn't panic or rush to hide it. She simply met his eyes with a calm intensity that made him take an involuntary step backward. Paxton stammered, all pretense evaporating. Nice bike. He retreated quickly to his friends, whispering urgently while stealing glances back at Carmen. Their expressions shifted from amusement to wary respect as the information spread among them. Ren, observing this transformation through her camera lens, moved closer to capture the moment when perception shifted. Carmen simply continued her work, her movements never faltering as the mood around her transformed from mockery to hushed speculation. By afternoon, word had spread through Thunder Valley about the woman with the ink. Carmen had moved to the mechanical competition area, where riders troubleshot deliberately sabotaged engines against the clock. She observed quietly from the sidelines, occasionally shaking her head at inefficient approaches but offering no commentary. The change in how people regarded her was subtle but unmistakable. Younger riders gave her space, eyes darting to her covered forearm with newfound respect. Older attendees studied her with calculating expressions, as if trying to place a familiar face from a distant past. Ren positioned herself nearby, documenting both Carmen and the changing reactions to her. Through her viewfinder, she captured the moment when Lachlan Ghost Reeves arrived with his entourage, a legendary figure in the authentic biker world, whose presence caused a ripple of attention throughout the competition area. Ghost was in his mid-60s, his leathers bearing the legitimate marks of decades on the road. His nickname had come from his ability to appear and disappear across state lines during the height of the territorial conflicts in the 1980s. Now semi-legitimate as a custom bike builder with his own reality show, he still commanded the respect of both authentic riders and the weekend warriors who knew his reputation. When Ghost spotted Carmen across the competition area, his weathered face registered immediate recognition, followed by something more complex, a mixture of respect, wariness, and what appeared to be old guilt. He broke away from his entourage and approached her directly, while others watched the confrontation nervously. Their conversation was too quiet for anyone nearby to hear, but their body language told a story of shared history. Ghost spoke earnestly, gesturing occasionally with his hands. Carmen's typically impassive expression cracked slightly, revealing momentary vulnerability before she controlled it again. When Ghost placed a hand on her shoulder, she allowed it to remain for exactly 3 seconds before subtly shifting her weight, causing him to withdraw the contact. After Ghost left, Ren approached Carmen, who had returned to watching the competition with renewed intensity. "Excuse me," Ren said. "I'm Ren Holloway. I'm working on a documentary about the evolution of motorcycle culture from authentic riders to modern interpretations." Carmen gave her a flat look that clearly communicated her lack of interest. "I was hoping I might be able to talk with you," Ren continued undeterred, "about mechanical techniques, if nothing else. Your knowledge would add real credibility to the project." "Not interested," Carmen replied, her voice surprisingly soft for someone with such a commanding presence. Ren hesitated, then played her one card. "Archer Holloway was my father." The name landed like a physical impact. Carmen's eyes narrowed slightly as she studied Ren's face with new interest. "He wore the same ink you're hiding," Ren added quietly. After a long moment, Carmen nodded once. "I'll talk about mechanics, nothing else, no camera." In a makeshift workshop tent away from the main events, Carmen demonstrated engine repair techniques while carefully avoiding personal questions. Her knowledge was encyclopedic, her hands moving with decades of muscle memory as she explained methods for improving performance and reliability that weren't found in any manual. "This intake modification," she explained, sketching on a notepad rather than allowing video, "increases fuel efficiency without sacrificing power. We used to make these adjustments in '82 for border runs." She caught herself, falling silent abruptly. "Border runs?" Ren prompted. "Long rides," Carmen corrected, her expression closing again. "That's all I meant." Before Ren could press further, the tent flap opened and Paxton entered with his crew, now treating Carmen with an exaggerated respect that bordered on mockery. The famous mechanic giving lessons, Paxton announced, his earlier fear transformed into something more calculating. Mind if we learn from the master? Carmen continued her demonstration without acknowledging him, but Paxton persisted, his questions becoming increasingly pointed. So, where exactly did you ride with the angels? Which chapter? What years? When Carmen remained silent, his questions grew more provocative. Or maybe you just found some old lady's hand-me-down jacket with a souvenir tattoo. Something dangerous flashed in Carmen's eyes, the first real emotion she had shown since arriving at Thunder Valley. Sensing vulnerability, Paxton pressed his advantage, issuing a public challenge. How about a head-to-head mechanical competition? Let's see if those hands remember what they supposedly did back in the day. The crowd that had gathered sensed conflict, the atmosphere in the tent shifting toward tension. When Carmen declined with a shake of her head, Paxton pushed harder. That's what I thought. All legend, no proof. For a long moment, Carmen simply looked at him, her gaze so penetrating that several onlookers shifted uncomfortably. Then, with a single nod, she accepted the challenge. Word spread quickly, and by the time they set up at the main competition area, a substantial crowd had gathered. The contest was straightforward. Identical engines had been sabotaged in specific ways, and competitors had to diagnose and repair them against the clock. As they prepared, Ghost appeared again, watching with undisguised interest. Carmen removed her riding jacket, revealing strong arms corded with lean muscle beneath a simple black t-shirt. She kept the sleeve pulled down over her tattoo, but the awareness of it permeated the crowd. When the timer started, the difference in their approaches became immediately apparent. Where Paxton worked with showy confidence, Carmen's movements were economical, almost meditative. Her hands moved with such precision that several professional mechanics in the crowd began whispering to each other in admiration. Paxton, increasingly frustrated by the obvious skill gap, leaned toward Carmen and whispered, "I know who you are. You're Phantom, the ghost mechanic from the San Bernardino War." Carmen's hand slipped just barely, causing a small cut across her palm from a piece of metal. Blood dripped onto her tools as the crowd cheered her apparent victory, her engine roaring to life nearly 2 minutes before Paxton completed his repairs. As Carmen wrapped a bandana around her bleeding hand, Ren captured the moment on camera, including Carmen's other arm, where the sleeve had ridden up again. But this time, the lens revealed more than just the death head tattoo. Above it was a distinctive series of numbers and symbols that made Ren lower her camera in shock, her expression transforming from curiosity to astonishment. Night had fallen over Thunder Valley, transforming the rally into a different kind of gathering. Campfires dotted the landscape as stories and drinks flowed freely. A makeshift stage hosted a band playing classic rock covers, their music washing over the encampment. The atmosphere was carnival-like, but with an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been present during daylight hours. Carmen moved silently through the shadows, her few possessions already packed on her bike. The mechanical competition had drawn more attention than she wanted, and years of survival had taught her when it was time to move on. As she secured the last of her gear, Ren emerged from between the rows of parked motorcycles. "You're leaving," Ren said. It wasn't a question. Carmen continued her preparations without responding. "I know what those numbers mean," Ren continued, her voice steady. "Above your death head. That's a federal protected witness code." Carmen's hands stilled momentarily, but she neither confirmed nor denied the observation. "My father had the same tattoo," Ren pressed on. "The death head, not the numbers. He died protecting the club's secrets." Her voice hardened slightly. "But you talked." The accusation hung in the air between them, heavy with judgment. Carmen zipped her saddlebag closed with finality, still silent. "She never talked," came a graveled voice from behind them. Ghost stepped into the pool of light cast by a nearby lantern, his expression unreadable. She was the only one who didn't. Several other older bikers materialized from the darkness, forming a loose semicircle. Carmen tensed almost imperceptibly, her eyes tracking each new arrival with the wariness of someone who had learned the hard way to count exits. "What do you mean?" Ren asked, confusion evident in her voice. Ghost moved closer, his eyes never leaving Carmen's face. "You're making a documentary about our world. You should know the real history, not the myth." He gestured toward Carmen. "She was the Phantom back when that meant something. Best mechanic on the West Coast. Could make an engine whisper quiet for night runs or squeeze performance nobody else could match. One of the older bikers nodded in confirmation. Saved my life in '88 when my bike died in cartel territory. Had me running again in minutes with nothing but a multi-tool and wire she pulled from her boot. When the feds cracked down in the '90s, Ghost continued, they wanted her more than anyone. Not for what she'd done, for what she knew. Motorcycle modifications meant transportation routes. Engine specs meant weight calculations for different cargo. Her memory was photographic. She could identify every rider, every route, every drop point across 3 states. Carmen's expression remained impassive, but her breathing had quickened slightly. They offered her witness protection to testify, Ghost said, his voice dropping lower. Total immunity plus a new identity if she'd give them what she knew. And she took it, Wren concluded, glancing at the numbered tattoo. No, Ghost corrected firmly. She refused, served 8 years in federal prison rather than betray the Brotherhood. Wren's brow furrowed in confusion as she looked at the witness code tattoo. Ghost's expression darkened. The code was forcibly given to her by federal agents before her sentencing. They wanted other inmates and everyone in our world to believe she had turned. A death sentence by proxy if there ever was one. Understanding dawned on Wren's face. They marked her as an informant even though she wasn't one. Oldest trick in their playbook, another older biker confirmed. Make loyalty look like betrayal. As Ghost spoke, more people had gathered, drawn by the unusual congregation of old-school riders. Paxton and his crew lingered at the edges, listening intently. The worst part, Ghost continued, genuine regret evident in his voice, was that it worked. When she got out after 8 years, the club exiled her anyway. Too many believed the feds' lie. Too many were afraid to risk trusting her, despite her sacrifice. The crowd had grown silent, the band's music now a distant backdrop to this unexpected revelation. You knew, Wren said to Ghost. You knew the truth. Ghost nodded slowly. Some of us did. By the time we had proof she'd kept the code, the damage was done. She was already gone, riding solo. Carmen finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. Ancient history, let it stay buried. No, Ghost said firmly. I've been looking for you for 15 years to set this right. He turned to address the gathered crowd. You all wear the symbols, patches, colors. You build your bikes to look the part. But this woman lived the code when it actually meant something. The mood had shifted palpably. Older riders had removed their hats in respect. Even Paxton looked subdued, the magnitude of his earlier disrespect now apparent. Ghost turned back to Carmen. On behalf of those who should have stood by you, I apologize for the club's failure to honor your sacrifice. Carmen's expression remained guarded. I don't need ceremony. Maybe not, Ghost acknowledged, but we need to give it. In a move that sent murmurs through the crowd, Ghost removed his riding gloves, revealing his club tattoos in their full glory. Then, in an unprecedented gesture, he knelt before Carmen, something a senior member would never do for anyone outside the highest echelons of respect. One by one, other authentic riders followed suit, creating a circle of kneeling figures around her. Even Paxton, understanding the significance of what he was witnessing, slowly took a knee. Carmen stood in the center, her expression complex, pain, vindication, and the weight of decades of silence all visible in her features as she surveyed the riders kneeling before her. For several long moments, no one spoke. Then Carmen broke her silence, her voice stronger than it had been before. I didn't keep quiet for the club, she said, each word deliberate. I kept quiet for the code. There's a difference. She turned slowly, addressing the gathered riders. The code wasn't about patches or territories or even brotherhood. It was about living by your word. When you said something, it meant something. When you committed, it was absolute. Her gaze settled on the younger riders, including Paxton. You wear the symbols without knowing their cost. That's not a judgment. It's a mercy. Be grateful you never had to learn what they truly meant. Finally, she looked directly at Ghost. I never wanted recognition, just the right to ride my own road. She extended her hand to him, not in forgiveness, but in acknowledgement of a shared past. Ghost rose to his feet and clasped her offered hand with both of his, the gesture sealing something unspoken between them. As the circle broke, the gathered crowd dispersed slowly. conversations hushed and reflective. The carnival atmosphere of the rally had been temporarily suspended, replaced by something more authentic and substantial. Ren approached Carmen again, camera lowered respectfully. "Would you reconsider? Let me tell your story properly?" Carmen studied her for a long moment. "Why does it matter to you?" "Because my father died believing in something most people only pretend to understand," Ren replied. "And because stories like yours get buried while the mythology gets merchandised." Carmen didn't immediately respond, but she didn't walk away either, which from her, Ren was beginning to understand, represented significant consideration. Dawn broke over Thunder Valley with the soft golden light that precedes full morning. Dew covered the motorcycles parked throughout the campground, most attendees still sleeping after the night's revelations and celebrations. Carmen worked methodically on her bike, making final preparations for departure. Unlike the previous day's maintenance, these adjustments were purely functional, oil-checked, chains, tensioned, cargo secured. Ren approached with 2 steaming cups of coffee, offering one silently. After a moment's consideration, Carmen accepted it with a nod of acknowledgement. They stood in companionable silence as the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the campground. Around them, the rally was waking up. Riders who had witnessed the previous night's events spoke in hushed tones, pointing discreetly toward Carmen when they thought she wasn't looking. The story had spread overnight, growing with each retelling. Paxton approached alone, his demeanor completely transformed from the previous day. He hesitated at a respectful distance until Carmen acknowledged him with a glance. "I wanted to apologize," he said, without preamble. "I was out of line, way out of line." Carmen regarded him evenly, neither accepting nor rejecting his apology. "I was wondering," Paxton continued, pushing through his obvious discomfort, "if you might look at my bike before I head out. Something's not right with the timing, and after seeing you work yesterday." Carmen considered this request for a long moment, then nodded once. "Bring it over." Relief washed over Paxton's face as he hurried back to his campsite. When he returned with his over-customized machine, Carmen immediately began examining it with clinical precision. "Too much chrome, not enough function," she observed, running her hands along the engine. "You've got aftermarket parts that don't match your riding style." "How do you know my riding style?" Paxton asked, genuinely curious. Carmen glanced pointedly at his pristine boots. "I don't. That's the problem." As she began making adjustments, other young riders gathered around, watching with interest as Carmen provided matter-of-fact corrections to Paxton's modifications. What began as a simple check became an impromptu masterclass in motorcycle maintenance. "Balance before beauty," Carmen explained, demonstrating how certain modifications had thrown off the bike's center of gravity. "A bike that looks perfect but rides wrong isn't worth the metal it's built from." The gathered riders listened with genuine attention, Paxton's previous arrogance replaced with earnest concentration. Carmen's explanations were sparse but precise, each word chosen for maximum efficiency, just like her mechanical movements. Ren filmed this interaction from a respectful distance, capturing the transfer of knowledge across generations. When Carmen noticed the camera, she didn't object, seeming to understand the importance of documentation. Ghost appeared at the edge of the gathering, watching with approval. When Carmen completed her adjustments to Paxton's bike, she stood back, wiping her hands on a shop rag. "It'll run smoother now," she told him. "Still not what it could be, but better." "Thank you," Paxton said, sincerity evident in his voice. After a moment's hesitation, he added, "Can I ask about your time inside? The 8 years?" The question hung in the air, one that would have been unthinkable just a day earlier. The gathered riders held their breath, wondering if he had overstepped again. Carmen's answer came after careful consideration. "Every road demands its toll. What matters is whether the journey was worth the price." The simplicity and depth of her response left Paxton nodding slowly, understanding something fundamental about the culture he had been playing at joining. As mid-morning approached, Carmen finished packing her final items. The rally was winding down, riders preparing to return to their everyday lives. What happened next, however, was unprecedented in Thunder Valley's history. As Carmen prepared to mount her bike, riders began approaching individually to show respect. Some offered simple nods, others spoke briefly of how her story had affected them. Ghost appeared with his entourage, carrying a small wooden box. "Before you go," he he said. "We wanted you to have this." Inside the box was a carefully preserved piece of paper, the original design sketch for the death head tattoo from the 1970s, signed by the artist who had created the iconic image. "You carried this longer and with more honor than most who wore it on their backs," Ghost told her. "This belongs with you." Carmen accepted the gift with quiet dignity. Then, in a gesture that surprised everyone, Paxton and several other young riders approached. "We'd be honored if you'd allow us to ride with you for the first few miles," Paxton said. "Not as followers, but as an honor guard." After considering this request, Carmen nodded her acceptance. The symbolic significance wasn't lost on anyone present, the old guard acknowledging her sacrifice, the new generation learning from her example. Before mounting her bike, Carmen sought out Ren, who was packing her camera equipment. "Your documentary," Carmen said. "Show me what you have." Ren quickly set up her laptop, displaying rough footage she'd edited overnight. The project had clearly evolved from a general piece about biker culture to Carmen's specific story, interweaving the previous day's events with historical context about the era when the code meant life or death. This could help people understand what it really meant. The code, the brotherhood, the sacrifice, Ren explained. Not the commercialized version, but the real history. Carmen watched thoughtfully, then pointed to footage of herself teaching the younger riders that morning. "That's the only part that matters," she said. "The knowledge continuing, not who I was or what happened to me." "So you don't want me to tell your story?" Ren asked, disappointment evident in her voice. "I didn't say that," Carmen corrected. "Tell it if you want, but focus on the principles, not the mythology. Too much of that already." With that condition, she gave her permission for her story to be included in the documentary, providing Ren with the kind of authentic perspective few filmmakers ever accessed. As Carmen finally mounted her bike, riders formed a path for her departure. Ghost gave her the traditional club salute, one she hadn't received in decades. The younger riders, including Paxton, followed suit, creating a corridor of respect. Carmen returned the salute, acknowledging both the past and the present. Then she started her engine, the perfectly tuned Harley rumbling to life with a sound that spoke of thousands of miles of open road. She rode away from Thunder Valley, flanked by Paxton and his crew, their presence serving as both honor guard and symbol of passing knowledge to a new generation. After several miles, they peeled off one by one, each offering a final salute as they departed, leaving Carmen to ride alone as she preferred. Back at Thunder Valley, Ghost stood beside Ren as they watched Carmen disappear into the distance. "Will she be back next year?" Ren asked. Ghost shook his head. "She never repeats her road, but her tracks will stay with us." As the final bikes departed and Thunder Valley returned to its ordinary existence, Ren packed away her equipment, now holding something far more valuable than the documentary she had originally planned. She had captured the moment when mythology gave way to reality, when symbols regained their meaning, and when respect was earned rather than demanded. The story of the woman with the tattoo would continue to spread, evolving with each telling. But unlike most biker legends, this one carried something more substantial than mere spectacle, a reminder that beneath the patches and chrome and carefully cultivated image lay principles that some had actually lived by, regardless of the cost. 6 months later, Ren's documentary premiered at an independent film festival. The screening room was packed, not just with film enthusiasts, but with riders from various clubs and walks of life. Ghost had helped spread the word, ensuring that authentic voices from the culture would be present to witness the telling of Carmen's story. The film opened with footage of Thunder Valley, contrasting the commercial spectacle of modern rallies with archival images from the 1970s and 80s, when motorcycle culture operated under different rules and higher stakes. Carmen's story unfolded gradually, just as it had at the rally, her quiet dignity and uncompromising principles revealed through the perspectives of those who had witnessed her journey. The moment when Ghost knelt before her received audible reactions from the audience, many of whom understood the profound significance of such a gesture within that world. But the heart of the documentary, as Carmen had requested, focused on the principles she embodied, rather than the mythology. It was about living with absolute integrity to one's word, about the meaning of loyalty when tested by fire, and about the transfer of knowledge to those who would come after. When the lights came up after the screening, the applause was sustained and genuine. Wren stood to answer questions, surprised to find herself emotional after witnessing the impact of the story on this diverse audience. "Is she here?" someone asked, referring to Carmen. "No," Wren answered. "She moves on her own terms." "Did she ever reconnect with the club officially?" another audience member inquired. "That's not the point of her story," Ghost answered, standing from his seat in the back row. "She never needed our validation. We needed hers." After the screening, Wren found Ghost outside the venue, lighting a cigarette with hands that betrayed a slight tremor. "She would have hated all this attention," he said, though his expression suggested approval of the film itself. "But she would have appreciated the truth being told," Wren countered. Ghost nodded in agreement. "Have you heard from her?" "Just once," Wren replied, pulling out her phone to show him a simple text message that had arrived from an untraceable number. "You got it right." Ghost smiled at that, the highest praise Carmen could offer. "The younger riders at Thunder Valley have started a scholarship fund in her name," he told Wren, "for women studying mechanical engineering." "She'd probably hate that too," Wren said with a small laugh. "Probably," Ghost agreed. "But it's not about her anymore. It's about what she represents." That was the legacy Carmen had inadvertently created, something that transcended her individual story. By simply living according to her principles without compromise, she had created a reference point in a culture increasingly divorced from its own foundational values. In the year following the documentary's release, Wren received reports of its impact throughout the riding community. Mechanical workshops modeled after Carmen's impromptu teaching session were being organized at rallies across the country. Older riders were finding renewed respect as repositories of knowledge rather than just nostalgic relics, and the commercialization of motorcycle culture was being challenged by a renewed emphasis on authenticity and earned respect. Paxton, perhaps most surprisingly, had transformed his relationship with riding. His social media, once filled with posed photos on his over-chromed bike, now documented a cross-country journey focused on mechanical skills and the actual experience of the road. He had become an unexpected ambassador for the values Carmen had demonstrated, bridging the gap between the older and younger generations of riders. 2 years after Thunder Valley, Wren was filming at another rally when she spotted a solitary rider in the distance. The figure was unmistakable, the same economical posture, the same meticulously maintained vintage Harley. Carmen had arrived unannounced, positioning herself at the periphery of the gathering, observing rather than participating. Wren approached slowly, giving Carmen plenty of time to depart if that was her preference. But the older woman remained in place, acknowledging Wren's arrival with a slight nod. "I didn't expect to see you at another rally," Wren said, setting her camera aside as a gesture of respect. "I heard there were some decent mechanics here," Carmen replied, the ghost of a smile touching her eyes, if not her lips. "Thought I'd see if they know what they're talking about?" Wren recognized this for the significant gesture it was, Carmen's willingness to engage with the community again, even peripherally. "Your film changed things," Carmen added after a moment. "Not entirely, but enough to matter." "It's your story that changed things," Wren corrected. "I just documented it." Carmen shook her head slightly. "Stories don't change anything unless they connect to something people already know is true." She gestured toward the rally where, indeed, the atmosphere seemed different from Thunder Valley, less posturing and more genuine engagement with the mechanical and experiential aspects of riding. They were ready to remember what all this was supposed to mean. As they spoke, Wren noticed riders beginning to recognize Carmen, whispers spreading through the gathering. Unlike at Thunder Valley, however, the response wasn't fear or shock, but a quieter form of respect. Several older riders offered subtle salutes from a distance, not approaching directly, but acknowledging her presence and its significance. "They're not going to leave you alone for long," Wren observed. Carmen nodded, already preparing to depart. "I don't stay anywhere long enough to be found." She paused, then added with unexpected openness, "except by those who need to find me." It was then that Wren understood Carmen's presence wasn't coincidental. She was deliberately making herself available as a living resource, appearing just long enough to connect with those who truly sought the knowledge she carried, then vanishing again before the attention could become about her rather than what she represented. "Will you let me film you this time?" Wren asked. "Teaching, I mean." Carmen considered this, then gave a single nod of assent. "The work, not me." Over the next few hours, Wren captured something extraordinary, a spontaneous gathering of mechanics and riders around Carmen as she demonstrated techniques and principles that had nearly been lost to time. Young and old alike watched with rapt attention as her weathered hands moved with practiced precision, her explanations sparse but perfectly clear. What struck Wren most was how Carmen never presented herself as exceptional. She spoke of these skills as common knowledge that had simply been set aside in favor of superficial customization and image. She was not preserving herself in the historical record, but ensuring that practical wisdom survived her. By late afternoon, Carmen was preparing to leave again. This time, however, there was no ceremonial departure, no honor guard or formal acknowledgments. She had come as a teacher, not a legend, and would depart the same way. "Where will you go?" Wren asked as Carmen mounted her bike. "Where I'm needed," Carmen replied simply. "How will anyone find you?" "They won't," Carmen said, "but I'll find them." With that cryptic answer, she started her engine and rode away, a solitary figure against the setting sun. Wren didn't film her departure this time. Some moments weren't meant to be documented, but simply experienced. In the years that followed, rumors would occasionally surface about a woman matching Carmen's description appearing at rallies or in remote mechanical shops, staying just long enough to share knowledge before moving on. Some claimed she was training a new generation of master mechanics. Others said she was building a network of authentic riders committed to preserving the true spirit of the culture. Wren never confirmed these stories, though she sometimes received anonymous packages containing footage of mechanical demonstrations that she incorporated into educational materials distributed throughout the riding community. Whether these came from Carmen herself or those she had taught remained unclear. What was clear, however, was that Carmen's legacy had transcended her individual story. She had become something more powerful than a legend, a principle embodied, a standard against which authenticity could be measured. In a culture increasingly defined by appearance rather than substance, she represented the uncompromising reality behind the carefully cultivated image. Ghost, who remained in contact with Wren over the years, perhaps summarized it best when asked about Carmen's continuing influence. "Some people wear the colors, some earn them, but the rarest are those who live what they mean, even when no one's watching." Carmen reminded us of the difference. The woman with the tattoo had never sought recognition, but through her unwavering commitment to her principles, she had earned something far more valuable, a respect that couldn't be purchased with patches or performances, only with the quiet dignity of a life lived according to one's own code, regardless of the cost. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If stories of quiet strength and unexpected respect move you, please consider subscribing to help us share more powerful moments that often go untold.